Hello everyone, this is my first time YouTube live streaming, so please bear with me if things don't go well. I'll be live streaming the NASA Artemis I Moon mission launch. I'm very excited for it. It's amazing that we are returning to the moon again. Hi, looks like we have one visitor.
T-minus 1
Thank
minute
you for joining.
30 seconds.
GLS, go for core stage to internal power.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power.
So tense right
there's
now.
no more hold time available because there's no more
I
margin
hope
on
you
the
can hear
battery.
me.
So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague,
Historically,
Leah Cheshire,
we have
will
never
take over
reached this
commentary.
point with the SLS
T-minus
rocket
50
in our
seconds
previous
and
tries.
counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2
GLS,
seconds.
go for ALS.
And we are go for
Awesome.
ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing
15.
under the ML.
Awesome.
And here we go.
Wow.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiate.
Come on.
7, 6,
6,
5,
5, 4,
four-stage engine start.
3,
3,
2,
2, 1.
1.
Boosters in.
Woo!
And liftoff of Artemis I.
Awesome!
Rise together. Back to
Look
the
at
moon
that.
and beyond.
Wow. Artemis is very much real right now, guys. Come on. Wow. So many years of development, and we can finally see it actually take off. This is amazing.
At 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis I. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket.
Come on, just go past it. I hope you guys can hear me, by the way. If not, please let me know in the chat. And if you can hear the stream as well.
You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here.
Wow.
In the loops of Mission Control. Full core stage engines throttling down and passing through max Q. Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the
Sorry,
flight,
I have a
traveling
bit
at
of cold.
1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis I. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these
Awesome.
177-foot boosters. Now the
Yes,
core
it
stage
has
continues
finally
to
happened,
power
my
the flight
friend.
of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange.
Yes, absolutely amazing indeed.
2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis I, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated.
Awesome. Looks to be going well, and a nominal flight
And
for
the
the
launch
SLS
abort
rocket.
system pyros
There
have
was so
fired,
much.
separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis I. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels, fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis I, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good.
Alright. So this is the mission timeline. Basically, these are the series of events that we expect to happen soon. We are about past the 4-minute mark right now, so we should expect the core stage cutoff in about 3 minutes or so. So as you can see in the graphic that I've pulled up right now. And after that, the second stage will separate from the first stage. The second stage is what will give the Orion spacecraft the power necessary to be on a trajectory to the moon. So that should be expected just about 10 seconds after the main engine cutoff of the core stage. The burn, however, for the burn for the Orion that will put it on a trajectory to the moon, however, is not scheduled for about 40 minutes from the separation. So that's because it will have to come back and target a specific point in its initial Earth orbit, so that it can, have the most efficient transfer to the moon for its design. So that we can expect at about T plus 51 minutes, which means about 45 minutes from now. And with that, I'll switch back to the live stream.
Until that core stage main engine cutoff time, our 4 core stage engines continue to fire at maximum thrust. Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control, Houston. As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down. Now 7 minutes 45 seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour. Continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control Houston. We're standing by for core stage main engine cutoff. And we have confirmation of core stage main engine cutoff. Orion is now in Earth's orbit. The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff. And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deploy approximately 18 minutes after liftoff. But before Orion stretches its wings, let's check back in with our friends at Kennedy Space Center and hear all about what it was like to hear the rocket roar off the launch pad. Megan and Kayla, I've got to hear all about it.
Well, if you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center, where we just watched Artemis I launch, our first step towards our next adventure into deep space. As Leah said, I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron. And I'm kind of still giddy and speechless. I don't even know how to...
Alright, so we are past the core stage separation from the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which is the second stage of the SLS rocket, and with that, the next major event that should be expected is about 30 minutes from now, roughly speaking. That is when again if you're just joining right now, that is when again the second stage will fire its engines for about, I think, 20 or 30 seconds. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, 20 seconds to give Orion spacecraft a boost towards the moon. So the Artemis I Moon mission is intended to test out the entire system stack that NASA has built, which is the SLS rocket, including its second stage, the Orion spacecraft, which will host astronauts in lunar orbit, and the landing element is separate. For Artemis missions, the landing element will be built by commercial companies. So for example, the Artemis III mission, which will carry the first humans to the moon as part of Artemis program, will be landing on a SpaceX lander, SpaceX Starship lunar variant lander in sometime around 2025. But the SLS and Orion will be the system that will be used for mating that will be used for launching the astronauts to the moon. So astronauts will launch on SLS and Orion to lunar orbit, which is where the Starship lunar lander will dock with it, and the astronauts will transfer over to Starship, after which point Starship will go and land on the moon, and the surface mission is expected to be about 7 days, 6.5 days to be precise, after which point they will again, Starship will let up its engines once again, and it will launch from the moon to lunar orbit, where it will rendezvous with Orion and dock again, so that astronauts can transfer back and Orion can safely return them back to Earth. So yeah, so that's basically the trajectory that the Artemis III mission will take, the architecture for the Artemis III mission. But what is important here right now is Artemis I has basically the entire system stack that will be again used for all future Artemis missions, so Artemis 2, 3 and beyond. Of course, for Artemis 4 we'll have an upgraded stack. The second stage of the SLS rocket will be upgraded to be able to carry more payload to the moon, but the system roughly stays the same. So with Artemis 1 having a successful launch so far, and what looks to be a very nice nominal mission, this is huge news, because this is essentially setting in stone our return to the moon. Until this point we were just building hardware, lots of hardware all around the world, literally, because it's not just a US mission. Remember that the Orion spacecraft has an extended service module, which we will talk about soon as we proceed into this live stream later on. But the extended service module essentially is built uh, by European countries. So ESA manages that contract. Uh, so yeah, so basically we have what is a much more international moon mission with Artemis than we have ever had, with Apollo or any of the missions in the last few years of the scale. So yep, that's that's why this is important, because now we are at a point where Artemis is real. So I just want to take a pause at this point and see if anyone has any questions that maybe I can answer. So I'd be happy to take any questions. Also, apologies for the very bare bones live stream right here. I didn't really know how to live stream on YouTube until this point, because I'm a writer. I mean, those of you who are watching, I presume you have been reading my blogs. So I just kind of learned the basics of OBS Studio like a few hours ago, and tried to put together this live stream. So yeah, apologies if it's not a very quality stream. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to drop in and ask a question, and I'll try to answer that ASAP. In the meanwhile, let's switch over to NASA's the primary live stream, where they are addressing the mission control right now.
It is not by chance that you are here today. So I want you to look around at this team, and know that you have earned it. You have earned your place in the room. You have earned this moment. You have earned your place in history. You were part of a first. Doesn't come along very often. Once in a career, maybe. But we are all part of something incredibly special, the first launch of Artemis. The first step in returning our country to the moon and on to Mars. What you have done today will inspire generations to come. So thank you. Thank you for your resilience. I said at the pre-test briefing, the harder the climb, the better the view. We showed the Space Coast tonight. What a beautiful view it is. So congratulations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I definitely hope it's not the last one. So Artemis has a lot of potential, and if the architecture and program planning that NASA has been doing for the last 5 years at least, for Artemis, for making Artemis sustainable, then hopefully we shouldn't have any problem sustaining the program, or the campaign, precisely, because it's not technically a program, it's a campaign. There have been many criticisms of Artemis being a program, not being a program, via many watchdog agencies that are part of NASA. For example, the NASA Office of Inspector General, they push out critical reports related to Artemis and how NASA is going about planning it. So it highlights the pain points and the issues that might arise because of the way planning is going out at any point.
35:45 now.
So one of the issues pointed out with Artemis was that it's not a program, it's more like a campaign, which means that there's no common program manager as such, and therefore it's more like multiple related pieces trying to coordinate multiple missions at a huge scale. So that is being worked on right now based on the feedback by the Office of Inspector General, and hopefully it's resolved soon. But what it essentially means is
Thanks, Megan. And yes, we're here in Mission Control Houston, still monitoring the Artemis I mission and the first flight of Orion atop the Space Launch System. So far, we saw successful liftoff at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time, all the way through separation from the core stage. We now have Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage flying free. And we've just heard that we have initiated solar array deploy. So we are turning our focus to that. The spacecraft was running on battery power, but stretching these wings will allow it to stop relying on those batteries and significantly extend the time it can stay in space.
awesome.
So solar array deploy takes about 12 minutes. We have 4 solar arrays that we need to deploy and latch. These will provide power to the spacecraft on its journey to distant retrograde orbit and all the way back to Earth. Once these are properly configured, again, Orion will no longer need to rely solely on battery power. And we expect this to be done about 30 minutes after liftoff. Right now, we're 19 minutes since liftoff today. Orion is now traveling 17,175 miles per hour. We're continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control Houston from the flight controllers monitoring the mission. A little bit about these solar arrays as we wait. Again, we heard the call that the deploy has been initiated. We'll hear a little bit more about that once they start to unfold. These 4 solar arrays generate 11 kilowatts of power, which is enough electricity to power 2 3-bedroom houses, and they have a wingspan of 63 feet. Just one of these 6.5 by 6.5 foot panels has 1,250 solar cells, so you're looking at a total of 15,000 solar cells. Now, we just heard the call that all 4 solar arrays have been released, so we initially heard the initiation call. That command had been sent. Now those 4 solar arrays are released. Again, this is about a 12-minute process. These solar arrays will deploy straight, and you're getting a live view right now. This is really exciting. They'll eventually be swept back against the vehicle prior to translunar injection burn to prevent any loads from breaking or damaging the arrays. And on the end of each solar array is a camera that will capture imagery for us throughout the mission, along with a few other cameras placed outside and inside the spacecraft to help us monitor and perform various other inspections. Of course, if you recall the Apollo capsule design, there were no solar arrays. We had fuel cells instead. So this design with arrays gives us the opportunity to stay in orbit longer, since we practically have no limit to the energy available for use from the sun. Coming up on 21 minutes since liftoff. Orion is attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. You can see those 4 solar arrays unfolding now. And again, Artemis I is a flight test. It's paving the way for a sustainable presence at the moon. Looking forward to the future, Gateway will be our space station in lunar orbit. And we have some similarities and differences in the solar arrays unfolding right now on Orion and those that'll be on Gateway. So like we're seeing now, these are deploying autonomously. The Gateway solar arrays will as well. And while these generate those 11 kilowatts of power, the 2 rollout solar arrays, or ROSAs, on Gateway will generate 60 kilowatts of power. That ROSA design is currently being tested aboard the space station. We have 2 new ones installed and a spacewalk conducted earlier today, preparing for another set. Preparing for another set.
Wow, look at that. Views from space of a capsule made to carry
Coming up
humans.
on 22 minutes since liftoff today, Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage traveling over 16,800 miles per hour. The solar arrays deploying now are part of the European Service Module. It's comprised of 20,000 parts and components. The Service Module was developed as part of an agreement between NASA and the European Space Agency, or ESA. This is the first time NASA is using a European-built system as a critical element to power an American spacecraft.
And that's the good part, you know. international collaboration is always nice wherever possible, and it essentially builds in resilience for the program, especially when you're trying to do something as huge as returning humans to the moon, not just to, return for the sake of it, but to sustain them uh, over time. So we are 20 minutes away from the perigee burn for the second stage of the SLS rocket, which will be about a 22-second burn to be precise, that will raise its orbit around Earth so that it can then target a longer burn uh, at a later moment in time to put the Orion spacecraft on the trajectory to the moon. So that later burn will come about 35 minutes after the perigee burn is done. So I have some useful links in the description, in the video description right now, wherein, for example, if you click on the post liftoff timeline that I have labeled to be, you can look at the
Coming
exact.
up now, and 24 minutes into the flight of Artemis I, spacecraft now traveling at 16,500 miles per hour around the Earth. We are in solar array deploy, and we have confirmation all 4 arrays are deployed.
Alright, so all the 4 arrays of Orion have been deployed. This is awesome. So yeah, as I was saying, we can, if you click on the post liftoff timeline, you will be able to see the precise timings of these upcoming
Coming up in a
second
little less
stage
than
burns.
30 minutes is the perigee raise maneuver.
And there's also the press kit link in the description, wherein you will get a ton of information by NASA on various aspects of the mission. It is extremely exhaustive, so I highly recommend checking that out. And of course, those of you who have been following my blog and presumably are here because of it, you will of course get a rundown and a brief overview of everything related to Artemis and other lunar exploration updates continually on my Moon Monday newsletter. So if you have any questions, again, please feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll try to answer them ASAP. So the questions need not be related to Artemis I in itself specifically, because Artemis I is the beginning of so many
And with
things.
our launch at 1:41 Eastern Time this morning, we are looking for a perigee raise maneuver about 53 minutes into today's flight. Again, we are now 25 minutes and 47 seconds into the flight, and we have a complete deployment of all 4 solar arrays. Orion's journey to the moon continues as planned. Again, looking forward to that perigee raise maneuver. That'll be coming up again at about 53 minutes into the mission, so about 27.
Because it's as I said, Artemis I is the start of so much more than just this particular mission. So it is the start of the entire Artemis campaign and our global return to the moon. So if you have any questions about lunar exploration in general, robotic exploration, crewed exploration, what kind of science the orbiters are doing, what other countries are planning in our return to the moon. Of course, all of that information is available on my website, but if you have any specific questions that you haven't seen me cover, feel free to ask.
We caught a glimpse there of those solar arrays, and with all 4 solar arrays properly deployed, Orion's journey to the moon continues, and we've got more operational updates coming up shortly, but for now, I'm going to toss it back to Megan and Kayla at Kennedy.
Leah, thank you so much. Our return to the moon will be different than the last time. We plan to explore more of the lunar surface and learn how to live and work there. With more on our destination, let's bring back NASA's Dan Hewitt with our new moon board.
So I've just updated the YouTube description, the YouTube live description for my video to include NASA's Artemis blog, which has many great updates. And if you're the kind of person, like me, who doesn't, who prefers reading rather than watching and want to get to the crux of the matter, then I highly recommend checking out NASA's official Artemis blog, where they have been constantly updating us with the status of the mission, even as we speak right now. I'll also put it here in the live chat in case that works. Oh yeah, it works. Great.
Oxygen and hydrogen, that's rocket fuel. We just launched the most powerful rocket in history using those constituent parts. And so you can start to live off the land. We can use that, something called in situ resource utilization. And really, the whole point of that is to use the moon as this proving ground. We're trying to get to Mars. We're trying to learn to live on other planets where there is gravity, where we're going to have to use resources there on the ground because we won't be able to bring everything with us. And by going to the lunar South Pole, by going to stay under Artemis, we're going to be able to start practicing that. We're going to perfect those systems, perfect those techniques and operations we need to do that, so we can use the moon as that jumping off point to Mars and beyond. So that's why the moon. We're going to see Orion fly around it for the very first time in just a couple of days. That launch was spectacular. I'm still way too excited, but can't wait to see some shots of the moon from up close from Orion. So I'll send it back over to you, Megan.
Thanks so much, Dan. So right now we're actually joined by members of the Red Crew. You'll remember from watching the launch coverage that the Red Crew was sent out by the launch team when the launch team identified a small leak on a hydrogen valve inside of the mobile launcher. Well, now here they are. This is Trent Annis. Trent, can you just introduce everybody else here on your team?
Yeah, so this is Chad. He's our safety guy. And behind me is Billy. And he's the experienced hydrogen tech out here.
And the three of you guys really, I would say, saved the day today. I mean, really, you guys had to go in there to what's called the blast danger zone. You guys are specially trained to be able to do operations on the pad while cryo is loading. Talk to us about getting that call, being told, hey, you guys need to go in there. And it was the first time for all three of you.
Yeah, all I can say is we were very excited. I was ready to get up there and go.
Really? How are you guys feeling?
Very, very comfortable, very confident in the test team and the procedures and our training. We did a great job.
Walk us. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
How gratifying it must be for you guys, because you train for this eventuality, but don't always get to do it. Billy was saying that he's been a Red Crew team member for 37 years, and this is the first time he's been called to go into the blast danger zone. So I know for us, when we're training for all of these eventualities, whether it's a spacewalk or robotics operations, we really want to put that training into practice. How do you guys feel like it went today?
Amazing. I still can't believe it. It's surreal to me. It's just insane.
Yeah, kind of walk us through what you were thinking. So you get there, and what? Is it just like game time and you're really focused, or, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'd say we were very focused on what was happening up there, just making sure we knew what was happening. Because the rocket's, it's alive, it's creaking, it's making venting noises, it's pretty scary. So on zero deck, my heart was pumping, my nerves were going, but yeah, we showed up today. I think as soon as we walked up the stairs, we were ready to rock and roll.
And they were telling us a bit about it while you were working on it. You guys were actually just torquing down the valve to prevent or reduce the leak rate or stop the leak. Is that right?
That's right. Just the packing gland was a little loose, so went up there and tightened her up.
You're probably still like in this oh my gosh moment, like all of us are. You know, has it actually hit you, like the role you played today in making Artemis 1 launch?
You know, I still can't believe it. Like, it's, like I said, it's surreal and just amazing. I don't know about you guys, but
They're nodding along behind you, for sure. Anything you want to say to the launch team? Again, this is a big day for the launch team, for you guys, NASA, but really the whole world. I mean, this is a historic launch that I think will...
Hey Ben, thank you for showing up and thank you for joining the live stream. It's really great to know that you like my work and you read my work. I didn't know that. Thank you very much. And obviously I'm a huge fan of Apollo in real time, as is I guess everyone in the entire space community. So thank you again.
Thanks, Megan, and it has been a pretty smooth ride.
ICPS are now free flying, so let's head back to Leah again to talk about how the journey is going so far.
All right, we are on our next milestone. So exciting.
Thanks, Megan, and it has been a pretty smooth ride so far, and we are now, again, like you mentioned, coming up on 36 minutes since launch. That puts us about 17 minutes into the perigee until the perigee raise maneuver. That's going to be the maneuver that lifts the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth and puts us where we need to be ahead of the translunar injection burn. The translunar injection burn is that really long burn that we're going to need to send us on to the moon. So we've been treated to some exciting views from the spacecraft today, including, and we hope to see some from inside the cabin, but we expect to continue receiving photo updates throughout the mission. It takes a team, though, to bring the imagery of Orion down to Earth, so let's meet them.
The imagery that we're collecting on Artemis I and the mission itself is preparing to carry humans to the moon. The Orion Imager team is going to be monitoring every aspect of visual spacecraft performance for the entire duration of the mission. The first time that we're going to be live streaming digital video from its spacecraft back down to the Earth from the vicinity of the moon. That's never been done before. What we'll be transmitting live streaming will be lower resolution, more compressed, because we have to fit it into a thinner pipe, if you will. Every one of these cameras is in its position where it is and it's configured the way it is for a very specific reason. We're going to be monitoring anything that we can see with the cameras for spacecraft performance. The imagery teams at NASA are composed of dozens and dozens of very highly trained, very specialized people, engineers, technicians, analysts. If we can see it, we're going to try and keep an eye on it. Imagery has been invaluable throughout the history of NASA. We flew cameras on Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, all of that stuff that we saw with the astronauts around the moon. It helps us detect the unknown unknowns. It allows us to see things that we didn't anticipate happening before. So when we do fly people on Artemis II, we can have a high confidence that everything is working the way it should.
And that made this liftoff happen tonight. So we are going to toss it back to Megan and Kayla now. Like the red team that Megan and Kayla just got to interview. A really big thanks to them and everyone that made this liftoff happen tonight. So we are going to toss it back to Megan and Kayla now at KSC. Again, we're about 15 minutes away from perigee raise maneuver.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, we wanted to take us back into Orion and talk about some of the science that's being enabled by Artemis I today. So inside of Orion are 10 of these. So they're called CubeSats because they're tiny satellites. Essentially, they're the size of the shoebox, but they're folded down. But then once they're deployed, they're opened up. They have solar arrays, things like that. That's when it gets a lot bigger. Now, these are called secondary payloads for this mission. Kayla, can you talk to us about what secondary payloads are?
Yeah, it just really means that it's not a primary objective of the mission. We're not relying on the success of these CubeSats for overall mission success. It's kind of a bonus payload, right? A chance to deploy these satellites that have different sensors on them and collect some awesome data to support other research objectives.
Yeah, and I know battery life is a concern for some of them, but all 10 were deployed, and scientists, I'm sure, are eager to see what kind of information that hopefully they'll be able to get. And they're just some of several research projects.
Alright, so we are 10 minutes away from about 10 minutes away from the second stage one. So remember guys, this is still not done yet. We are in fact in one of the most critical phases of the mission, and the first stage has done its job. It performed nominally, and that was, I think, a collective sigh of relief across the entire space community, regardless of their support for or against the SLS rocket. But you know, everyone supports a return to the moon, so that's amazing. And for that to happen, the second stage also needs to do its job. The second stage is made by ULA. It is based on their upper stage for the Delta 4 rocket, the Delta 4 heavy rocket that they have. And once it fires for about 20 seconds in just about 10 minutes right now, it will raise the orbit of the connected Orion stack, to be able to then do a burn towards the moon. So hopefully we'll get a nominal burn right now, and that should be a much bigger relief than it should be a relief in itself. So let's see. As for the signs on Artemis 1, so once the perigee burn is done, about 35 minutes later, we'll get the lunar injection burn, which will put Orion on a trajectory towards the moon. And shortly after that, depending on the various precise time frames for separating the independent CubeSats on board connected to the Orion spacecraft. So there are approximately 9 CubeSats on Artemis 1. So they are connected just between the Orion and the second stage. So they are all mounted on the Orion adapter stage ring between the two elements, and they are missions of various kinds. So I've just dropped the link in the chat about the signs of those missions, and we basically have them falling in 3 broad categories. So we have one category which is lunar missions. So there are 2 CubeSats which will study water on the moon. As you guys might already know that water is in fact the reason that we are going to the moon again. At least it's the primary reason we are going to the moon again. So in 2008, when Chandrayaan-1 launched, India launched Chandrayaan-1, and the most important thing it is remembered for is its discovery of water ice on the moon, rather its confirmation of water ice on the moon, because scientists already had a hint back then for about at least a decade or more that there is water ice on the moon, but they weren't sure. The data wasn't conclusive, and with Chandrayaan-1 we could confirm that. And so now we are living in a period since where we went from thinking there must be water on the moon to knowing there is water on the moon and roughly knowing where it is, although we still do not know at what scales does that water exist, as in what is the state of that water, and how could we possibly extract it, and so on. What is the physical state of it, and so on. The chemical state of it, even, is it bound to minerals, or is it otherwise loosely locked up in the lunar soil, especially at the permanently shadowed regions on the lunar poles, which is where majority of the missions from across the globe will be going in this decade. So 2 of these CubeSats on Artemis 1, called Lunar HMAP and Lunar Ice Cube, they will be essentially, they are orbiters, they are CubeSat orbiters, and they will map water ice on the moon in their own ways. So one of them is actually a hydrogen mapper. It doesn't map water ice directly, but it maps hydrogen as an indicator of the It maps hydrogen as an indicator of water, and the other one is called lunar ice cube, which has an infrared spectrometer not very dissimilar from the one on Chandrayaan 1, Chandrayaan 2, or as well, and Chandrayaan 2 orbiter as well. So lunar ice cube will directly map water across the moon's surface, and it will also measure water vapor in the thin lunar atmosphere. So the moon doesn't have an atmosphere like Earth has, but it does have a thin exosphere. So which means that there are loose molecules, sort of floating, levitating in the above the surface, because of the weak but still present gravity of the moon. So Luna HMAP Luna HMAP and Lunar Ice Cube will map water ice on the moon. So those are the two CubeSats related to the moon. Joining it will be the Lunar Infrared Imaging CubeSat, which is built by Terran Orbital and Lockheed Martin. But their job is different. It's not necessarily to map water on the moon, but it's to test a futuristic system where it's test because infrared spectrometers need to be operating at cooler temperatures. There are certain restrictions to it in terms of mass. So this CubeSat will test a novel system with a lower mass to see if and how we could map water on the moon in the future and minerals on the moon in the future in advanced ways at higher resolution with lower mass and lower budgets. At the same time, the second category of missions that Artemis 1 is carrying. Hold on, let's see if there is an update on the. Yep, we are still good on that one. So the second set of missions that Artemis 1 will have are technology demonstrations. So basically, for example, they have a CubeSat that is going to be solar sailing in space, just like the Planetary Society's Light Sail 2 that launched a few years ago on a Falcon Heavy rocket. So these use the solar wind to basically control themselves instead of using active propulsion systems. So this is a larger sail than the one on the Planetary Society's Light Sail 2 mission, and it will slowly glide using the solar wind to visit a near-Earth asteroid. So that's a pretty cool tech demonstration, and I'm pretty excited for the views of the asteroid that it gives from using this method. And the other one on board is sorry. The other one on board is the Japanese Omonotashi. We have an update. I can hear some chatter in the background, but alright, so the one of the other CubeSats on board on Artemis 1 is the Japanese Space Agency's Omotenashi CubeSat, which is basically a semi-soft lander, which is ingenious. So they are going to do somewhat of an airbag landing, semi-soft landing on the moon, and if they succeed, they would technically become the fourth nation in the world to achieve a lunar landing, after the US, the Soviet Union, and China. So that's a pretty cool tech demonstration, and the Japanese have their way of coming up with such novel things. One of the other interesting experiments on board, this is not a CubeSat, but it's an experiment on board Orion itself, are the radiation detectors. So Orion has a bunch of radiation experiment. For example, there are two upper female torsos on board Orion, and they are provided by the European Space Agency, and they are outfitted with lots of radiation sensors across their body, and their job would be to measure the exact impact of deep space radiation on different parts of the body, particularly the female body, to see what is the risk posed to them in terms of if when future female astronauts go on moon missions and stay for extended periods on the NASA-led International Gateway Space Station, what are the kind of possible ill effects they could face from the deep space radiation. That is what these two female torsos will be measuring on Orion throughout its 26-day mission. There's also a bunch of different radiation experiments on board Orion, which are either passive or active. Again, more than half of these are provided by ESA, so they will be also measuring the radiation uh, inside the capsule, so as to see what kind of effects it might have on future explorers. So that's another thing. The other thing that we have to look out for is some update. So hopefully we are near to the second stage burn for a perigee race.
The sun.
Yes, it's incredibly hot, so we rely on that heat shield to keep our systems and our crew safe, but we expect that it'll perform well, but we're excited to see how it does in about 26 days.
Okay. One last question from social media. What qualifications are required to be?
So the other experiment on board is on a CubeSat called BioSentinel, and it's a very interesting one. So it has yeast organisms inside it, and basically what it will be not in a lunar orbit but in a solar orbit, and their job is to see, in solar orbit where deep space solar radiation as well as galactic cosmic radiation is there. Their job is to see how does it affect and damage the DNA of these yeast. And the reason
Thanks,
they chose...
Megan, and you're right. We are coming up on perigee raise maneuver about 2 minutes from now. We are now 51 minutes into the flight of Artemis I after lifting off at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time from Kennedy Space Center. The vehicle now traveling over 14,600 miles per hour. So during Orion's orbit of Earth, it reaches an apogee and a perigee. The apogee is the highest point above Earth's surface, and the perigee is the lowest. Therefore, this perigee raise maneuver is a firing of the ICPS RL-10 engine, and it's going to raise the lowest point of Orion's orbit over Earth. This also included a checkout of Orion's systems and any adjustments to the solar arrays. All 4 of those solar arrays, as you can see, are swept back. That's going to keep them from having any loads imparted that might damage them for use later in the mission. This also, the perigee raise maneuver, will put us in the proper position for the translunar injection burn. That's that really big and long burn that we need to send us to the moon. We're about 1 minute away from the perigee raise maneuver. This is a shorter burn. It's less than 30 seconds.
Okay, hopefully this works. This is really critical.
About 45 seconds until the perigee raise maneuver. Coming up on 53 minutes into today's mission, and we are standing by for the start of the perigee raise maneuver. Again, this is a firing of the RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. It's less than 30 seconds long.
All right, the time is now. The time has come.
And we have confirmation of perigee raise maneuver ignition and full thrust.
Awesome.
This is a live view from the spacecraft. Again, a really short burn. We're standing by for the cutoff.
Alright, hopefully it powers through the entire 20 seconds just fine. this will be a good indicator for the next burn, which is much longer, which is about 20 minutes.
And we have confirmation of perigee raise maneuver cut off.
Awesome.
Flight Dynamics Officer reporting on the loops here at Mission Control Houston that it was a good burn. We are now 54 minutes into the flight, Orion traveling 14,700 miles per hour, and that was the perigee raise maneuver, lifting the lowest part of Orion's orbit around the Earth and putting us right where we want to be for the translunar injection burn. We're looking for that translunar injection burn to happen about 1 hour and 26 minutes after launch, so about 30 minutes from now. That'll be that long burn that helps us break free from the pull of Earth's gravity and commits the spacecraft to a lunar trajectory. So with successful completion of the perigee raise maneuver, I'm going to toss it back to Megan at KSC.
Alright, so we are past the second stage perigee burn, which is amazing because this now means that the second stage is working absolutely as intended. And the next event that we are coming up on now is the second stage burn for injecting for putting the fully stacked Orion spacecraft on a trajectory to the moon, and that will be approximately an 18-minute burn, and hopefully that should work just fine when it starts in about 30 minutes. So yep, I think we are looking good now on the entire Artemis I mission working as expected. Of course, the very last part of the mission shouldn't be forgotten, which is when Orion splashes back to Earth. So when it comes back to Earth, it will re-enter our atmosphere at a velocity faster than any other spacecraft before. So it will face a lot of heat, which is why they have designed a skip atmospheric entry system, which basically is not very dissimilar from what China did with the Chang'e 5 sample return capsule, wherein it first enters the atmosphere at an angle such that it skips for a bit. It doesn't directly enter the atmosphere, it skips and bounces and then enters the atmosphere. So this lowers the velocity just enough to make the heat manageable. So that is another nail-biting part of the Artemis I mission, which I hope goes well, but that is 26 days away. So as far as today is concerned, we are looking very good. And as long as the second stage 18-minute burn for putting Orion on a lunar trajectory and the Orion separation itself go well, we are looking at a very nominal Artemis I mission. So that's amazing, I think. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them as and when I can. So NASA Administrator Bill Nelson is speaking on the official live stream. Let me put that on.
You to be the leader of our organization for a historic launch like this. We've been talking about the team it takes to get this done. How does it feel to be at the helm of that ship?
Well, I got to talk to the Launch Control Center team, and I said to them, you all are a part of a great legacy that has been many, many years coming, a lot of sweat and tears, and this legacy is now taking us as we explore the heavens. And it didn't end with Apollo 17, but this time we're going back and we're going to learn a lot of what we have to, and then we're going to Mars with humans.
Why is it such a priority for the agency to land the first woman and first person of color on the moon through this Artemis program?
Well, I think it's reflective of us. It's reflective of America. We are people, our Latin emblem is E pluribus unum. In the chamber of the United States Senate, over that main door is E pluribus unum, out of many one. And so our astronaut corps reflects that. And it's going to be the first boots back on the moon are going to be the first woman and the next man.
And another goal of the Artemis program is to spur economic development. Can you talk to us about how this program has been able to do that for the country?
Well, if you put it in NASA's economic report terms, it's billions of dollars affecting the economy, almost 400,000 jobs. But that's just direct. Think of all the indirect expenditures that are causing the economy to rise and more jobs. For example, what you guys are doing on the station, a lot of your research. Take, for example, the pharmaceutical research. You're helping already one drug that's being manufactured on Earth better because of what you learned in space, and that drug is attacking cancer. Now, what's the value of that? That's just additional value that is added. I remind everybody, in everybody's pocket, they've got a cell phone, and that's got a camera, and that's a camera on a chip that came out.
Alright, so one of the other CubeSats that we were talking about on Artemis 1 is the biological experiment called Biosentinel, and as I said before, scientists designing that experiment intend to study the effects of deep space radiation on yeast in solar orbit for about 6 months or so. The idea is that because they share similar DNA damage and repair mechanisms as to us humans, by being able to see how deep space radiation damages the DNA of yeast long term, we will get valuable insights into, how we could protect our future explorers from such radiation as we stay, for example, for a longer time in lunar orbit on the moon's surface, as well as on missions beyond, for example to Mars, which will involve at least 3 to 6 months of time depending on which propulsion system we use. But yeah, so that's the idea with one of these CubeSat experiments. The other experiment is called Equulis. It's again by the Japanese Space Agency, and just like the Omotenashi semi-soft lander, and Equulis will basically try to go at the Earth-Moon Lagrangian 2 point, where it will try to study the interactions of the solar wind, which is a stream of radiation coming from the sun and hitting the Earth's magnetosphere, and how those two interact is very critical to us understanding and designing future missions.
Today we are now 1 hour and 2. And we had a great ride to orbit today. We are now 1 hour and 2 minutes since we launched the Artemis I mission. Orion is traveling with the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, now almost 15,000 miles per hour. We recently saw the perigee raise maneuver. That's where we lifted the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth, and it puts us in the perfect position to prepare us for translunar injection burn coming up in about 25 minutes. So again, we are looking forward to that translunar injection burn. That's what it's going to commit us to our journey to the moon. And to tell us a little bit more about the translunar injection burn, we've got Dan Hewitt standing by to show us on the moon board how it's all going to go down.
Thanks, Leah. Everybody, welcome back to the moon board. So translunar injection, this is the big one. Just a refresher, we're going to be using this, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. This is what's taken over for all of our in-space propulsion maneuvers after that core stage and those boosters have since dropped away. Modified upper stage from the Delta IV family of rockets from the United Launch Alliance. Hydrogen, oxygen, fueling the RL-10B-2 engine produces about 24,000 pounds of thrust in a vacuum. Now, The translunar injection is what's going to give us the energy to go from low Earth orbit all the way out here. Now, what does that mean? Here comes a really overly simplified orbital mechanics lesson. Let's say you're in orbit around a planet, say Earth, and you're in a nice circular orbit, but you want to have that orbit be even higher. Well, what you can do is fire your engine behind you, increase your speed, and that then increases the corresponding apogee, or the highest point of your orbit, on the other side. And that's how you raise it up. Well, if you wanted to make it into a nice circle, you could follow up and do another burn right here, and that would raise your perigee, or your lowest point, and then you're in a circular orbit around Earth. That's essentially called a Hohmann transfer. If you've ever followed our missions to the space station, that's what we're doing to kind of gradually raise our orbit until we get to the space station. But for this, we're talking about a lot more energy to get somewhere a lot farther away. So what we're essentially doing is we're going to be in this circular orbit around planet Earth, and we are going to be firing that engine with 24,000 pounds of thrust for about 18 minutes. And what that does is it doesn't just increase your apogee by a little, it increases it all the way out, and it's timed. So by the time Orion is hitting its apogee, the highest point of that orbit, the moon will have moved into position that you're entering into its sphere of influence. You're entering into that area where the lunar gravity is going to be able to capture you. And so that's why we're firing the engine for that long. We need to have that much thrust, that much time to get the energy to go out there. So that's the rough orbital mechanics of what we're doing. Now, after that TLI burn is done, the ICPS is going to separate. Its job largely done in the Artemis I mission. As we heard, it's got some secondary payloads up in this stage adapter here that it's going to deploy on its way out. The ICPS will have one more burn after TLI called the disposal burn. And what that's going to do is put it on a trajectory almost looking parallel to that of Orion, where it's going to go around the moon, slingshot away, and then go into what's called a heliocentric orbit. It's actually going to go into orbit around the sun, just like Earth. It's going to leave the Earth-Moon system completely. And then after that, all of the propulsion duties get handed over to the European Service Module. So it'll be using its engines. It's going to do the outbound trajectory correction burn, at least the first one on flight day 1, and a couple more until we get out to the moon and get ready to head into distant retrograde orbit. So that's TLI. It's coming up next. It's going to be a really big moment to pay attention to. So we'll send it back over to Leah to walk us through the ops. Leah.
Thanks, Dan. We are 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis I, now traveling over 15,200 miles per hour. Again, we've recently had the perigee raise maneuver, and in less than 20 minutes now, we'll be looking for the translunar injection burn that Dan just showcased that's going to send us to the moon. But our mission started off with an epic show from the Space Launch System.
Alright, so on the CubeSat front, we
Again,
have
the Space Launch System is what carried us into orbit today, launching off at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. And we've got a couple of special guests from Marshall Space Flight Center. We have Bruce Tiller, the Solid Rocket Booster Manager, and Johnny Heflin, the RS-25 Engine Manager, to tell us more about the maiden voyage of the rocket. Now, they both got to watch it live at Kennedy Space Center. So a big hi to you, Bruce and Johnny. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So the other CubeSat on board Artemis I is called CUSP. Just like Ecolus, it is also going to study solar wind, but it is also a tech demonstration at the same time, wherein the idea is that it's sort of a forerunner to future CubeSats like it, wherein they would form a network of solar wind studying stations so that you can study the solar radiation in 3D essentially. And why is that important? Because once you are able to precisely track solar activity and the kind of dangerous radiation and solar flares that the sun puts out, you can better protect explorers. So for example, during in 1972, just between between two of the Apollo missions, there was a solar storm of high intensity, and had astronauts been on the surface at the time, it is almost certain that they would have faced damage to the storm would have damaged their bodies, and the risk of them getting cancer would have been much higher. So these are the kinds of solar activity that we want to be on top of as we plan a return to the moon and have humans for much longer than at any point in past, including the Apollo missions in deep space. So we have of course had uh, you know astronauts at the International Space Station for much longer. For example, we have had them for many astronauts for about a year at the space station continually, and many of them for over a year in disparate parts on their respective missions. But those are within the protective cocoon of the Earth's magnetic field, and therefore it's not as big of a threat to them as it is for explorers outside the magnetic field and on the moon and beyond. So these missions, while they may be just 14 kilogram CubeSats, it is missions like Achilles Cusp and the array of the armada of radiation detectors on board Orion, including the two upper female torsos that we talked about, and the plethora of passive detectors by ESA. All of them together are actually giving us a much better sense of what the deep space radiation environment actually looks like at scales that matter to us, and how it will affect our bodies and so on. So this is just the beginning. Of course, like the future missions will also carry radiation experiments, including future Artemis missions. There will also be a plethora of radiation detectors on board NASA's Gateway space station that we briefly mentioned earlier. So it is NASA, just like we have the International Space Station, there's NASA's upcoming space station around the moon, which is currently scheduled for a late 2024 launch on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket. It is smaller than the International Space Station, but it's important because it will be our first space station around the moon, and which can occupy astronauts for months on end. So this is going to be amazing, I think. And it launches late 2024, and it has a bunch of radiation detectors from both NASA and international space agencies. So ESA has a radiation detector outside the gateway, mounted outside the gateway, and NASA has one mounted inside the gateway, and they both detect radiation at different frequencies. So basically they are complementary to each other, and they will give us together they will give us a fuller picture of what kind of radiation environment can we expect around the moon for a longer period of time. So if we are to have astronauts living on the moon for months on end, as we go ahead in the Artemis campaign and beyond, what kind of radiation will they face? Is it hazardous to them? How hazardous it is? What kind of mechanisms and technologies do we need to develop to protect them in certain situations? How do we design mission operations around those things, and so on and so forth. So it's a whole host of questions, technologies, design decisions, operation decisions that we need to take, and for which this kinds of measurements on Artemis 1 and beyond will form the basis for. So yep, now we are about 20 minutes or so into the 15 to 20 minutes or so before we get the main second stage engine burn, which will put the Orion spacecraft on a trajectory towards the moon. So that's coming up, and that's the last key phase for today before we sign off for the mission. Hey Arun, thanks for joining me, and it's good to see you again too. So if you have any questions regarding the Artemis Moon mission, please feel free to ask in the chat, or even lunar exploration at large. So we are now currently awaiting the second stage burn for putting the Orion spacecraft on a lunar bound trajectory, and it's an 18-minute burn, so hopefully that goes well. And after that, shortly after that, we will expect the uh, checkouts to come in, and basically mission control will have to say it's nominal before the next phase of the mission can start, wherein you will see the second stage and the Orion disconnect from each other. So while the second stage burn completes, up to and after the second stage burn completes, basically Orion will stay connected to the uh, second stage for about 10 minutes, and then once everything is ensured that it's nominal, once mission control ensures that everything's nominal, Orion will separate from the second stage and be be the driver of its own mission from that point on. So Orion has one main engine, which is part of the European service module, and it has auxiliary thrusters. So that main engine will be the one responsible for putting Orion in lunar orbit in the coming days. So I believe that exact time is scheduled for about 10 days from now, when Orion will fly past the moon, very close to it, like about just a little bit over 100 kilometers from the moon at its closest point, and it will execute an engine burn which will put it in a distant retrograde trajectory around the moon, which is sort of like this. It's a very vast trajectory. It's not the usual orbit that most orbiters are in. For example, NASA LRO and India's Chandrayaan 2 orbiter are in a very tight polar or near polar orbit around the moon, that whose altitude is roughly 50 to 100 kilometers depending on what observations they want to make. But in the case of Orion, it will be much further away. But that's the kind of but Orion is testing an orbit which will be more relevant to the architecture that NASA has designed for human missions. So for example, when Artemis II launches and they have people around they have astronauts on board Artemis II, which will be a similar mission to Artemis 1, except with humans on board, and the mission time will be a bit shorter. But the Artemis 2 astronauts will be in a similar trajectory to what we are seeing with Artemis 1 right now. It will not be exactly the same, but it will be similar. So that will be again a good test of the future missions. So Arun asks, can you elaborate a bit more regarding the kind of thrusters used for lunar injection? Yes, sure. So basically the second stage that we are looking at, which is the ICPS stage, it is developed by I've put the timeline on the screen. So the second stage you can see on the right hand side, it is developed by ULA. It is based on the Centaur upper stage that they have developed for the Delta IV heavy mission. So it's very similar to that one, only adopted mildly with minor changes done to that to adapt it to the SLS rocket stat. So it's a single engine, unlike the second stage that you will see in future Artemis missions from Artemis 4 and beyond. Those will have a new second stage built from the ground up with 4 engines, but this one just has 1 engine, and the payload capacity of this is, roughly speaking, it is able to put 27, the entire SLS rocket stack with the first stage and the second stage, including this single engine, is able to put about 27,000 kilograms to a lunar bound orbit, which is almost the same level, same mass as what Orion is. So Orion space, the capsule and the European service module attached to it is roughly 24,000 kilograms. So we have not a lot of spare capacity left in this particular configuration. We have just about 3,000 kilograms left, more or less. And the CubeSats do not actually weigh a lot. These CubeSats which sit between the second stage and Orion, they basically weigh about 14 kilograms each. So they do not weigh roughly more than 140 kilograms or so. But we do not have a lot of margin on it because Orion is already a heavy system. So that's what the single engine second stage can do to orbit, which is why again NASA is building the second stage, the exploration upper stage they call it, for Artemis 4 and beyond, which will increase the capacity of this by 10,000 kilograms more, which means we can carry more large payloads other than just carrying Orion and any astronauts inside. So on the Artemis 4 mission, for example, we will have uh, the one of the elements of the Gateway Lunar Station. So that element is a habitable module co-built by JAXA and ESA, and that module will be attached to the then already flying NASA-led International Gateway Lunar Station, which will increase the habitable space for astronauts. So that module will be able to be launched by the Artemis 4 SLS rocket's second stage, which basically will be able to, because of its higher thrust, will be able to put that into their desired orbit. So that I hope that answers the question. If you have any specific follow-ups, please feel free to let me know. Great. So the other thing, in fact, I do remember one more thing right now. It's sort of difficult to get all the information at the same time, but yeah, I do remember now that the other thing that the second stage, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage for the SLS rocket right now will be responsible for is deploying all of those CubeSats. So let me see if I can pull that timeline right now very quickly. So give me a second. Thanks, Arun. Appreciate it. Alright, so I have put up something. Yep. Alright, so now we are looking at the timeline for the deployment of the CubeSats by the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and you can see each of those have different times when they will be separated. So keep in mind that once the final burn begins in just about a few minutes now, and that burn carries on for about 20 minutes, about 18 minutes, 10 minutes after that is when Orion separates. But these CubeSats, most of those will not be separated from the second stage at that point. So at that point the missions will diverge. So Orion will be on its own primary mission and these CubeSats will be on their secondary missions, and this is the timeline at which each of these independent CubeSats will be deployed for their on their respective trajectories by the second stage. So the second stage is also responsible for this, so it's quite a job for the second stage, and I think if they pull it off, ULA who built the second stage deserves quite a bit of appreciation for that. But there is one concern with the CubeSats, however. So let me just pull that right here, pull that specific info right here, which is to do with. Alright, so of the CubeSats on board Artemis 1, not all of them might complete their full mission. That is because the SLS rocket was tagged last year, and the rocket was fully stacked over a year ago, and the CubeSats, all of them were recharged, the batteries of them were recharged back then. Now because of their positions in this adapter structure that you see on screen, so this is the Orion adapter structure ring, which sits between the second stage and the Orion module. So because of the structure, the nature of the structure and where they sit, not all of these batteries can be recharged by NASA. So NASA was only able to recharge the battery recently when it was at the assembly building of Biosentinel, the NIA Scout solar sail experiment, and the Equilus CubeSat, and the Japanese Omono Tenashi Omotenashi, I'm so sorry about that, Omotenashi semi-soft lander. So only these 4 CubeSats have had their batteries recharged completely, which means they are in for a fully nominal try for their mission. But the other CubeSats have had their battery degrade at about at a rough rate of about 2% per month, I believe, last I checked. So there is a real concern about them running out of their batteries before they are able to recharge using their solar panels post deployment. So that is something we'll have to see over the next day, and hopefully we should know by tomorrow if any of these CubeSats are facing a threat to their missions. But many of them expressed a positive tone when this was last brought up to them, so hopefully not, but let's see. It's not clear at this moment if it will go our way or not. So yep, that's on the CubeSats, and now let's switch back to the live stream to see if we have some update. Alright, so the second stage burn has begun. It looks like it has begun, and I kind of missed that. Yes, indeed, the second stage burn has begun, and now this thing will go for like 18 minutes to put Orion spacecraft on a trajectory to the moon, and hopefully that works. Yes, so the burn has begun. And to answer Arun's questions about the propulsion systems on both these CubeSats, yes, absolutely, these CubeSats do have their onboard propulsion systems, varying in nature. Some have chemical propellant, some have plasma propulsion, depending on the nature of their mission. But either way, these are CubeSats, so their capability to correct for any major deviations in their expected trajectory are either none or minimal, so it will definitely be up to the second stage to do that for them. But they do have propulsion systems. So for example, the two CubeSats, the two lunar orbiters, which will map water on the moon, or map hydrogen in the case of Luna HMAP, as an indication of water on the moon. They will use their propulsion systems to get into their respective orbits around the moon. So yeah, that is definitely there. I'm not aware of their specific thrust and ISP levels, however, so that's something I will need to check back and get back to you on. As for the radiation levels at this altitude, you can roughly, once you are out of the protective magnetic field, Earth's protective magnetic field, and on or around the moon, you can expect at least 100 times more radiation levels, 100 to 1000 times more radiation levels based on exactly where you are. So then the International Space Station faces, for example, which is within the protective magnetic field of Earth. So let me also look at the other propulsion systems that these CubeSats have while we are waiting for an update. Alright, so you could, I don't have specific information on the thrust levels yet, but you could visit the my article on these CubeSats, wherein, hold on, let me pull up that link for you, and here you go. Yep. So this has links to each of those CubeSats and the respective websites, which should probably, with a bunch of link clicking, lead you to the specific propulsion systems on board these CubeSats. And as for the radiation levels, the link also has information on the specific radiation experiments that will be on board the Artemis 1, including on Orion. So you can check that out as well. So hopefully that answers your question. I mean, indirectly at least.
Or South Pole with neutron spectrometers. Amatanashi is the smallest lunar lander to study the lunar environment. State University will create higher fidelity maps of near-surface hydrogen in craters and other permanently shadowed study the lunar environment. And Lunar by Lockheed Martin in Colorado will perform advanced infrared imaging of the lunar surface. Now 3.5 minutes into the translunar injection burn. Again, it's about an 18-minute burn, traveling 18,560 miles per hour. Quiet on the loops here in mission control as the RL-10 engine continues doing its job on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. We talked about a few of our CubeSats. We also have one preparing to study an asteroid. The Near-Earth Asteroid Scout, or NEA Scout, by Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama will travel by solar sail to a near-Earth asteroid to take pictures of and make other characterizations of its surface. There's a CubeSat on board studying Earth called Equuleus by the University of Tokyo, along with JAXA in Japan. Equuleus stands for Equilibrium Lunar Earth Point 6U spacecraft and will travel to Lagrange Point 2, imaging Earth's plasmasphere for a better understanding of our planet's radiation environment. We're now coming up on 4 minutes and 45 seconds into the translunar injection burn. Orion traveling at 18,982 miles per hour. Our distance from the moon continues to decrease, now 251,900 miles away. To highlight some more of our CubeSats on board, we also have BioSentinel, developed by Ames Research Center in California, and will use a single yeast cell to detect, measure, and compare the impact of deep space radiation on living organisms over an extended period of time. Argo Moon was developed by the Italian Space Agency and Argotech in Italy. This CubeSat will observe the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, the stage that it's firing right now, with its advanced optics and software imaging system. And our last CubeSat through the Centennial Challenge is T. Miles from Florida, who developed a CubeSat that will demonstrate propulsion using plasma thrusters and will compete in NASA's Deep Space Derby. These CubeSats pack a ton of tech and science in a tiny package, so they don't all have redundant systems. And if any of the CubeSats missions don't go as planned, it does not affect our primary objectives of Orion's mission. This rideshare opportunity is a rare chance to send CubeSats beyond low Earth orbit, and we're looking forward to seeing what we learn. We're now 6 minutes into the translunar injection burn. Orion traveling at 19,500 miles per hour, being propelled by the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Still quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams are tracking no issues during the translunar injection burn. Again, this is about an 18-minute burn, so we have approximately 11.5 minutes left. It's also been 1 hour and 33 minutes since liftoff today from Kennedy Space Center. That was a 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time launch. A smooth ride uphill, as we heard from Bruce Tiller and Johnny Heflin working with SLS at Marshall Space Flight Center. And this view from Mission Control Houston, teams continuing to monitor the Artemis I mission. This is where they will be around the clock for the next 26 days, all the way until we bring Orion home for a safe splashdown. Coming up on 7.5 minutes until into the translunar injection burn, so less than 11 minutes left in the burn. Orion now traveling at almost 20,000 miles per hour, 251,237 miles away from the moon. Again, that number continuing to shrink. Orion itself is still over Earth. It is over the Pacific Ocean south of Hawaii. As we've mentioned in today's coverage, multiple countries are represented in Artemis I through the SLS, Orion, and European Service Module, as well as the payloads riding along. While NASA is leading the Artemis missions, international partnerships will play a key role in achieving a sustainable presence on the moon while preparing to send humans to Mars. In 2021, over a dozen countries signed the Artemis Accords, which will establish a common set of principles to govern the civil exploration and use of outer space. The Artemis Accords will create a safe, transparent environment that facilitates exploration, science, and commercial activities for all of humanity. This cooperation not only furthers space exploration, but also enhances peaceful relationships between countries on Earth. We're now over 9 minutes into the translunar injection burn, an 18-minute burn, so we have about 9 minutes left. We're about halfway through. The RL-10 engine continues to fire at maximum thrust. Orion traveling attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, now over 20,600 miles per hour. It's been 1 hour 37 minutes since we launched today. Again, that was 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time from Kennedy Space Center. Orion is still attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. This is the last burn for the interim cryogenic propulsion stage while attached to Orion. It will also have a disposal burn later on. About 10 minutes after we have ICPS cut off, Orion will separate from the interim cryogenic propulsion stage itself, and the capsule will be flying free, still attached to the European Service Module. We've got about 7 minutes left in the translunar injection burn. Orion traveling now at over 21,000 miles per hour.
Alright, so looks like the burn is going really well. That's awesome. Which means we have a completely nominal mission so far.
The RL-10 engine continues to fire on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, powering the translunar injection burn. This is the second firing of the ICPS today. The first we saw was the perigee raise maneuver, which lifted the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth and put it in the proper positioning for this burn. This is the burn that commits us to the moon. We're now over 12 minutes into this burn. Again, it's about an 18-minute burn, so less than 6 minutes left, and 1 hour 39 minutes since we launched. Orion and the ICPS now traveling at over 21,400 miles per hour. And as I promised, we continue to grow closer to the moon, now 249,000 miles away. Now over 13 minutes into the translunar injection burn, putting us less than 5 minutes away from cutoff. We have had a nominal burn so far. That RL-10 engine continues to fire at maximum thrust, 25,000 pounds of thrust. We're now traveling over 21,730 miles per hour. And we've just heard the call for priority 1, meaning we have reached the point at which we could return at lunar return or similar speeds, testing the heat shield as required ahead of flight for Artemis II.
Awesome.
Now over 14 minutes into the translunar injection burn, less than 4 minutes until cutoff, traveling now at over 21,900 miles per hour. Now less than 3 minutes away from cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and coming up on 1 hour and 42 minutes into the Artemis I mission. The RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage continues to fire as planned at maximum thrust. Again, this is about an 18-minute burn. That's about twice as long as the ride to orbit today, so that just shows how much power we need to break free from the pull of Earth and take us to the moon. Minutes now into the translunar injection burn. Orion traveling at over 22,276 miles per hour. About a minute and a half now until cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Again, this being an 18-minute burn. We are now 248,280 miles away from the moon and continuing to grow closer, 605 miles away from Earth, and continuing to increase that distance.
चालू है
Less than a minute now until cutoff of the ICPS. And the end
Sorry
of the
about that.
translunar injection burn, we've had a good burn all the way through so far. And 1 hour 44 minutes since launch today. And we have cutoff of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which has committed Orion to the translunar conjunction. The spacecraft is moon-bound.
Awesome. So the second stage has performed nominally, and we now have an
Orion is
amazing
now traveling
mission
at
so far.
22,500 miles per hour, 247,450 miles away from Earth. Now that the interim cryogenic propulsion stage has completed its translunar injection burn, it is no longer needed to propel us to the moon. It's done its job, and it will separate from Orion. After it separates, those 10 CubeSats we discussed will be deployed from the Orion stage adapter, which is below the service module and above the ICPS. Each payload will be ejected with a spring mechanism from dispensers installed on the Orion stage adapter. And again, these will help us study the moon and space weather, test innovative propulsion technologies, analyze the effects of radiation on organisms, and provide high-resolution imagery of the Earth and moon. The CubeSat deploys will start just short of about 4 hours after launch. Once those CubeSats are deployed, the ICPS will be on track for disposal in a heliocentric orbit, meaning it will closely circle the sun until destroyed.
Alright, so the second stage burn has been successfully completed, which means the rocket has performed absolutely nominally so far, which is, I think, a sigh of relief for basically everyone in the space community vouching for a return to the moon. Next up, we should see Orion separate from the second stage in about 8 to 9 minutes from now, after which point the Orion spacecraft will be on its own. It has one main engine as part of the European service module and auxiliary thrusters, the main engine will propel it towards the moon for the rest of its journey, and it will also be responsible for putting it into lunar orbit about 10 days from now. In the meanwhile, as the NASA live stream just mentioned, about 4 hours from now we will see the first CubeSats getting deployed. So I have pulled up the timeline for the CubeSat deployment here, and as you can see, we should first expect the lunar ice cube and Equalus to be deployed, along with Biosentinel to be deployed from ICPS soon, from the second stage soon, and these will have their own independent missions from there on. Again, to learn more about these scientific missions on board Artemis I, the slew of secondary scientific missions, in fact, which concern radiation, technology demonstrations, mapping water on the moon, and so on. This is like a lot of secondary science missions. And to know more about these, the link is in the description. You can check out the science and technology missions on board Artemis I. To know more about the mission itself, the primary mission of Artemis I, which is of course to test the fully stacked the full system stack of the SLS rocket, including its second stage and the Orion spacecraft, their ability to get into lunar orbit and back. So that mission, to read more about that mission, also check out the link in the description, where NASA has great details on the mission itself. And if you are the kind who wants more details, who wants to dive into rabbit holes, just like me, then you could you would have already done that. But if not, you can dive into the Artemis I press kit, also linked in the description. The press kit has a ton of information about every single aspect of the element, from preparations at the launch pad to post launch to the systems powering Orion, and so on and so forth. So you could check that out for getting more nerdy about details on the Orion 1 mission. But also, let's hope for a clean separation of Orion from the second stage in just about a few minutes from now. This is really exciting. We are awaiting information on the upcoming separation of the Orion spacecraft from the SLS rocket second stage, so stay tuned for that. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat and I'll try answering them ASAP. And the questions could be related to lunar exploration at large. It doesn't need to be focused on just Artemis 1. Because, as I said before, this is the start of Artemis as a program or a campaign, and it is the start of the global return to the moon with humans, with robots, and so on. So Artemis 1 is so much more than just the Artemis 1 mission. It is the starting of so many more things. So I'm really excited.
18,700 miles per hour, 2,270 miles away from Earth. Orion now traveling at 19,700 miles per hour, 2,270 miles away from Earth. We're expecting that stage separation to happen in about a minute.
Alright, let's stay tuned. This is the final major event for today, after which I think we are good to go. Wow, okay, looks like Orion has separated. Awesome, look at those views. It's amazing.
As you can see, we
Is
have
that Earth
confirmation
silhouetted in
of
the
interim
background? Yeah.
cryogenic propulsion stage from Orion.
Awesome. Alright, looks like
With the Earth in the background and the Moon is our destination, Artemis generation, we are going.
we are going indeed, and we will be going so many more times. This is amazing. Like, just think about that for a second. We are now in a time where Artemis 1 is a reality. It's no longer hardware that's sitting on Earth. It's no longer going through a series of tests and mitigations to get the thing off of Earth. It's real now. We have actually launched Artemis 1. Artemis 1 is practically history at this point, and I'm pretty sure that everyone is confident at this point that Orion is going to complete its mission of getting into lunar orbit, the distant retrograde orbit in particular, and shortly followed after that return to Earth with a skip atmospheric re-entry method and safely splash down on Earth. So hopefully we are now at a point where we can say Artemis 1 is the past, a successful one, and we can look forward to so much more happening. So just to take a look at okay, before that, I think there's some activity in the mission control. Alright, apparently not. So just to wrap up the recent launches, we saw first capstone launch to the moon about a couple of months ago. My bad. Capstone launch. Let me see, when did it launch exactly. Yep, June. Sorry. So we saw capstone spacecraft, which is led by Advanced Space and produced by the company called Terran Orbital and funded by NASA, to go in the same kind of orbit.
It's
that
been 1 hour, 57 minutes, and 40 seconds since Orion launched atop the SLS from Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time. After a smooth ride to orbit, a perigee raise maneuver, and a translunar injection burn conducted by the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, Orion is now flying free, attached to the European service module and on its journey to the moon. That might be the end of today's broadcast, but the Artemis 1 mission has only just begun. We'll continue live coverage for major milestones, including the outbound powered flyby and other major burns. But when we're not live, you can check out blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis and the NASA newsletter for updates on the spacecraft. We're also excited to introduce Artemis All Access. It's a short video product that will provide updates about mission accomplishments with a look at what's to come, as well as inside looks and explainers about the mission. And if you want to stay updated on mission activities and how to watch splashdown, you can still register as an online mission participant with NASA's virtual guest program to stay informed as the mission progresses. Virtual mission participants for Artemis I will receive curated resource and mission activities straight to their inbox. You can register at go.nasa.gov/virtualartemis1. That's a Roman numeral 1 as part of it.
Alright, so as I was saying, we had Capstone launch in late June, which just arrived in lunar orbit this Sunday after 4 months of a fuel-efficient trajectory, which was actually the first of its kind. So it took a unique trajectory outbound from the moon and then arching back towards it, and got into lunar orbit just this Sunday successfully. Many props to the entire team who recovered a failing spacecraft and got it into lunar orbit. This is just amazing. So Capstone was the first mission of this year, first moon mission of this year, followed shortly by South Korea's first lunar orbital called KPLO, Korea Pathfinder Lunar Orbiter. It launched about a month after Capstone, and it is scheduled to get into lunar orbit on December 16. And it is South Korea's first lunar orbiter, and it has many parallels to India's Chandrayaan-1 lunar orbiter, wherein they are collaborating just like India did with NASA. NASA has an instrument on board the KPLO. South Korea itself has 4 of its instruments on the orbiter, and South Korea will be studying the moon from its polar orbit to study both the water, ice and the terrain for enhanced science and planning, which will also help planning future exploration of the moon. So KPLO is the next event you should look up to is the KPLO orbiter entering lunar orbit on December 16. Then we have obviously SLS. So Orion should enter lunar orbit about 10 days from now. So that's the next event that we should look forward to. And after that, iSpace Japan, a private company which is about to launch their first lunar lander, which is amazing. Like, it is like just the fact that they could put the lander on the launch pad is amazing, I think. And so iSpace Japan will have their first lunar lander launch in about a couple of weeks from now. They haven't yet announced the exact date when they will launch, but they are tentatively targeting end of November. It will launch on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, and after some time orbiting the moon, once it's there, it will attempt a lunar landing. And if they are successful at that, it will become the first iSpace will become the first private company to land anything on the moon, and it will also probably cement Japan as the 4th nation to achieve a soft landing if the small CubeSat on board Artemis I by the Japanese space agency called the Omotenashi, if that doesn't succeed in its semi-soft attempt, then iSpace Japan will have its second go from the perspective of Japan. So let's hope for a successful landing for iSpace Japan, and let's see if we have any more missions towards the end of the year to look at. Well, as far as I can tell from I think that's all the missions that we have for end of year. Of course, I mean that includes the mini CubeSats on board Artemis 1, so it's not just Orion. So we should definitely look forward to the Luna HMAP and the Luna HMAP, the Equalis, the BioSentinel, and the other CubeSats to join their respective missions, to be in the main mission phase soon, of which for as far as lunar orbit specifically is concerned, we can expect that hold on, let me pull that link up again. So as far as the lunar orbit specifically is concerned, we should look forward to Luna HMAP and Lunar Ice Cube getting into lunar orbit soon, followed by a pass through from the Lunar Infrared Imaging CubeSat by Lockheed Martin and Terran Orbital. And of course, Romutena, she is also going to attempt its semi-soft landing in a few weeks from now. So I think that's it for my side. Thank you very much for joining. I know this was not a great quality stream. It was not even a good quality stream in any way for that matter. But it was my first live stream, and I think it went just as the first live stream would probably. But I appreciate everyone who joined and everyone who asked comments, showed up in the comments, etc., and everyone who supported. I may or may not do future live streams again, but this was definitely something of an experience. So thank you very much everyone for joining. Do not forget to subscribe to my newsletter Moon Monday, which is my flagship writing. I mean, if this it's probably as good as bad the live stream as the live stream was bad, for example. So the Moon Monday newsletter is my flagship writing, wherein you can continually find updates on global lunar exploration happenings, including exploration science, commercial and policy developments. It's read and recommended by many people in the industry, so I urge you to check that out and subscribe to that if you are not subscribed already, which is where you can follow most of my work. The YouTube live stream is sort of like an exception more than the rule. So I hope you subscribe to my newsletter, and thank you for showing up. And with that, we will end the live stream. Bye bye.